Well, hello folks, and welcome to DSLR Life once again. I'm Nigel Bailey. Something a bit different today because it's not possible for me to get out for a camp every week, I'm afraid. I wish I could. But this week I'm going to have a look at how I process some astrophotography shots. What I have found, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on astrophotography or on the processing. I'm just going to show you what I do. This is how I've learned to do this. I need to credit one or two other people that I've learned from along the way on YouTube, and I'll put some links to that as well down in the comments below. And so that includes, for example, Nick Page on his site and one or two others as well. And also need to give a bit of a shout out for some free Lightroom plugins that I've used from a chap called David Kingham, and again I'll put a link in those in the description below. So I'm going to try and get this done in less than 20 minutes or so, which is a tall order. Normally takes me about probably at least half an hour, maybe up to an hour to process a decent Milky Way shot. But what I have found is that when I've been out on a camp and I've done some night photography particularly, it tends to be the astro shots that seem to impact people the most. So I thought I'll just go through a little bit of my workflow for that. So without further ado, what you'll see on the screen right now is that I use Adobe Lightroom to process these shots, and I try to do everything in fact in Lightroom rather than messing around with Photoshop. It's just the way I prefer to do it, and because otherwise, you know, it's where do you draw the line? I could spend days and days on each photograph if I if I wanted to. So what you're seeing in front of you now is a clean image. I haven't done anything with this one as yet. And the first thing I'm going to work on is the white balance. So now to do that, I'm going to use one of the built-in or the free Lightroom plugins from David Kingham here. And so the first one I'm going to use here is White Balance Dark Sky. So I'm going to click on that, and immediately you'll see a change in the colour of the sky there. It's much more bluish. It's lost a lot of that orange tinge. And I tend to kind of fiddle around with this a little bit as things go on, because some of the other adjustments that I make are going to alter the way the sky looks as well. And this is all going to be very touchy-feely. It's also a matter of taste. You can, if you wish to, just you know, if you don't want the sky to be as blue, then you can increase the color temperature a bit, and vice versa. If you like it to be more blue, then you can reduce the color temperature a bit. This particular plugin puts it in at about 3,800. So I'll leave it as it is there, 3,800-ish. It's not an exact science. And a lot of this, and a lot of the things that you're about to see, are all to do with how we handle the contrast, especially in the sky and in the Milky Way. I'm going to ramp up here the saturation just temporarily, and the vibrancy, and there is a train of thought that what you can do is just put vibrancy and saturation full up and then adjust the color temperature and the tint so that you get a broadly even mix of sort of greens, magentas and blues, or as broadly equal as you can across the image to kind of balance it. The problem with that, if I then turn saturation and vibrancy off, is for me I just get something that looks simply too grey, and I don't like that. So it is a matter of taste. So I'm going to just reset this. I'm going to go back and I'm going to use the dark sky preset, and that I actually quite like the way that works. And I'm also going to use this preset here, which reduces light pollution, and I'm not going to add contrast at this stage because that's going to make it much more blue than I want to at this point. I'm going to deal with contrast a little bit later, but I'm just going to reduce light pollution, and that cuts down some of that orange tint as well. Right, so I'm now going to make some kind of global contrast adjustments. I'm going to reduce the highlights and take those really well down. I'm going to reduce the exposure a little bit, and I'm going to bring the whites up. Okay. And what you'll start to see is that this is, again, it's affecting the contrast, particularly in the Milky Way, and you're going to start to see some of these dust lanes, the detail of some of the dust lanes in the Milky Way. And I might even reduce the blacks a little bit. Let's just see what that does. Yeah. And again, that kind of makes it more bluey, which you may or may not like. It is, again, it's a matter of taste. So I could, if I wanted to, just make that a bit less blue by altering the white balance again. But as I do that, it's going to bring in more magenta. I'm going to need to bring the green down. So, you know, it's each adjustment that you make has some effect elsewhere. So what I'm just going to do, I'm going to put that back to where it was, and I'm not going to adjust the blacks quite yet. Right, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to deal with some of the global noise reduction settings. If you zoom in, and for this I'm using a zoom in level of 1 to 3, I might actually go in a little bit further. Let's just try 1 to 2. What you'll notice on the screen here is that the stars are slightly bean shaped, and that's because they've moved a little during the exposure. It's a 20-second exposure, this one. But you'll see these smaller dots of light. Those are basically camera noise, and those are not bean shaped. So that you can tell, therefore, that that represents camera noise. And I'm just going to play around with some of the noise reduction sliders here under the detail pane, and I'm going to increase the noise reduction quite high, about 40 something ish, and I'm going to leave the detail at around about 50, maybe a bit less, and I'm going to put the contrast fairly well up there. And what you can see now is a lot of those finer points of light are gone, but I've still got most of the bean shapes here, and those are the stars. Okay, so let's zoom back out, and so that's done a little bit of our adjustment there for global noise reduction settings. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to deal more specifically with the Milky Way, and again this is going to be a matter of altering contrast in one way or another, and my way of doing this, it's a bit labour intensive, I've got to say, but I'm going to do this through using a series of brushes, and I have put together some preset brushes just to help me do this, so I don't have to keep reinventing the wheel, but I'll tell you what they each do. So let's go to our brush tool, and I'm going to load in my dust lanes brush. And my dust lanes brush here, you can see, just ups the contrast a bit. I've put 19 there. The beauty of doing this, by the way, is that you can change all of these settings after the event if you feel that you want to make some further adjustments. And what else have I done here? Yeah, I've increased the clarity a little bit there, and as well, and I've just reduced the exposure a bit. I'm actually going to reduce the exposure a bit more, and then I'm going to change it again later, and the reason for doing that is that it will help me to see what I'm doing as I go. I don't want auto mask on this brush. The flow I want to be relatively low, and I'm going to have not much feathering, maybe 17, 18, 19, something like that, quite a small amount of feathering. And as I edit this picture, I'm just going to zoom in now to about 1 to 3 level. I'm not going to do the entire picture, but I'm going to concentrate on this kind of brightest part here of the Milky Way, just to give you a flavour of how I work this. And as I go along, I've got normally a finger, 2 fingers hovering over the keyboard, one that makes the brush smaller, the other that can make the brush bigger, and those are the square bracket keys. And what I'm going to try and do here is I'm going to pick out the dust lanes, these darker lines in the Milky Way as I go, and adjust them for the size that I need for each dust lane. So here's a little dust lane here, for example. I need a relatively small brush for that, and I'm going to start painting over it, and you'll see that this is actually having quite a big effect. By the time I finish, it will be much more subtle than that, because I will put the exposure change down to a smaller level. But just so I can see where I've been easily, I'm going to make it quite a big exposure change for now. So I'm just going to pick out all of these sort of slightly darker areas, a different size brush, varying it as I go. And you kind of, at this point, you're kind of painting, really. It's all about exposure. I'm not adding anything to the picture that isn't there already. I'm just helping to show it up. This is annoying me that it's quite such a dark exposure thing, because I like to be fairly subtle with this process. And how much detail you go into is entirely up to you. You know, that what you'll find is the longer that you look at this, the more you see, the more detail you begin to see. Another way of seeing where you've been, and as we go through this, this will become more obvious, is if you hover over the handle of the brush, it'll show you in red those parts of the image that you've already done something with. So I can see from that there's a big area down here I've not yet worked on, so I'm going to do that. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do more and more of these dust lanes, and then I'll fast forward to a later point for you, rather than bore you with the whole process. Okay, so that's before and that's after I've done that. And if I just hover here over the handle, you can see those areas, the dust lanes that I've picked out, particularly in this part of the sky. Okay, and the amount of detail that you go into really is up to you. You know, I can see little bits here that I've not yet been over. And as I go, I'm also varying how long or how much I'm doing on each lane. That if I can see that that's quite a subtle lane, then I'm not doing as much as I am for the main parts of it. Because I want to try as far as I can to preserve the integrity of the original sky, the original image there. I don't want to be inventing bits of the sky. I'm just trying to bring out what is already there. Okay, I'm now going to click a new brush, and I'm going to load in my brights brush, and what this does is it increases the shadows, it increases the whites, and it also adds a little bit of clarity as well. And again, I'm going to leave a bit of feathering, I'm going to leave auto mask off, and I'm going to leave the flow fairly like that. Actually, before I do that, I'm just going to go back to this original brush, and I'm going to change the exposure a little bit up. Okay, right, so but back to our new brush and brights, and similar thing, I'm just going to pick out the highlights, make them a bit brighter, and I'm kind of going between the dust lanes now. Again, I'm changing the size of this brush as I go, so I want to preserve these structures. The paler bits, I'm not going to put as much into those, I'm not going to hover over them as long. So what this is doing is just accentuating the difference, adding more contrast, if you like, between the dust lanes and the brighter areas of the image. Now here's a very particularly bright area, so I'm going to spend a bit more time on that one. This is particularly labour intensive. If you're doing a time lapse, this is not going to be the way to do it, because you'll just be there forever if you try and do this on every frame. It's obviously not going to work for that. This is for stills, really. Okay. Okay, and then the third brush that I'm going to apply, so I'm going to do another new brush here. So I should have two here already, look. So that was the one I used for the brighter areas. Actually, I see I've kind of missed a bit there. I'm just going to do that. Take another look. Okay, nearly there. It's addictive, this. You could be at this all night. Okay, you get the idea. Right, so another new brush now, and I'm going to load in another preset that I've made, and this one is called Contrast, Milky Way Contrast, and all this does is it ramps up the contrast by about, well, to 36 I've put here. I take the blacks down a bit and increase the exposure, and I'm going to do this with quite a broad brush. I'm going to turn the zoom off so I can see the whole thing, and quite a lot of feathering on this one because I don't want it to be a really obvious join where it meets the rest of the sky. So in fact, let's put the feather up even more, about 50, something like that. And that's sort of a size brush. And I'm just going to paint over the whole area of the Milky Way here. There we go. Everywhere that you've got either these dust lanes or core of the Milky Way. Okay, now I need to go back and make a few other adjustments here because it's now looking just kind of ridiculous, really. So I'm going to go back to these original brushes and we're just going to hopefully edit them. So I think this was our dark lanes, yeah, this was our dust lanes. So they're just, you know, it's a bit too much, that effect here, so I'm just going to reduce that exposure change, 0.1, something like that. And okay, let's just see what happens when I turn that off. Yeah, we're just adding a little bit to it. It's quite subtle, really. And let's go to the, I think this was for the, oh no, this one for the brighter areas. And we're just, I'm just going to give the whites maybe a little bit more, maybe a tad more exposure. That's too much. That's just too much. It'll look quite false. Okay, and contrast. I'm going to deal with that with the contrast brush, which was this one. Okay, that's not looking too bad, I don't think. See what happens if I increase the contrast a bit further. Yeah, I quite like having a really high level of contrast in that. This is all really very touchy-feely kind of stuff, I have to say. Right, okay, I think that's probably it for my brushes. And then I'm going to make a couple of global changes. We'll just go back out of zoom view. And okay, here we go, back to the basics pane. Just going to increase contrast overall a little bit and add a little bit of clarity to the whole sky. Okay, and then I might just go back to this brush here. I just want to experiment with making it a little bit warmer there. Just adding a little bit more colour into it, and maybe just a tad of saturation as well. And this is all really subtle stuff. Okay, so that's all the brushes on and off, and now I'm going to deal with the foreground very quickly. So I'm just going to neutralize all of that, and we're going to just increase the shadows and the exposure for the foreground. not massively, just enough to see that it's there. And I might take another brush here for noise, a bit of noise reduction, and just paint the foreground with that. You might want the hill, if it was you might want the hills in the background there to be completely silhouetted, but I particularly wanted to see there's a reservoir here and there's a little bit of fog hanging over the water there, a little bit of mist, and I wanted to show that. But this is annoying me, it's a little bit bright in the foreground here, so I'll do another brush. I'm going to reduce the exposure on that one just a tad, and the shadows, and just brush in over that one. So it's just a bit too bright. Not making any other adjustments with that, it's just, there we go, and it's not quite as in your face now. Okay, and then finally this area here, this is just really distracting, and so I'm going to do another new brush there, and I'm going to do two things. One, I'm going to desaturate it slightly. I'm going to stick with some feathering on it. There we go. So desaturate it slightly and also reduce the highlights and the whites. You've got to be careful with this because it can just end up looking really, really kind of false and nasty, noisy. Okay, but I don't think that's too bad. So if we just kind of have a bit of an overview here and look at the before and the after. Oh, sorry, library, view, develop, and compare side by side. There we go. So you can see quite a difference both in the coloration of the image, the white balance, the way the contrast in the Milky Way has been brought out. Obviously I didn't work on this area up here as much, but hopefully that gives you some sort of idea of what you can do just in terms of bringing out some of that detail in the Milky Way. Okay, so if you've managed to get this far, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found it useful. It's probably a bit blue, this image, isn't it? And you know, I'll probably continue altering some of this in terms of the white balance and stuff. But anyway, I hope you found that to be useful, and that it might help you to edit your own astro photography shots. If you've enjoyed it, do subscribe, and all the usual things. Share it, comment below if you've got any helpful tips on how to edit astrophotography shots yourself. I'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time in the next episode of DSLR Life. Bye for now.